Thank you, Paul. I think essentially what the Chairman has indicated is that the approach that we consistently take is advocating good public policy outcomes. The methodology that was employed in developing this particular document and the subsequent one that recommended 10 clear public policy objectives was done through the formation of a commission of experts that Paul referred to. And the mix of options that were available clearly was one that went to both sides of politics and what they appeared to stand for and what they were prepared to do, and applied a bit of politics 101 over the top of the economic measures and suggested here was a package of 5 different options that might be available, pick a few from all over the shop, and this would bring the result that we thought. But clearly, as the Chairman has indicated, as time has marched on in 6 months, we're perhaps not as close to a realistic outcome as we suggested might be possible had both sides of politics bothered to read and respond to this much earlier. Now, the opportunity, as always, for questions to our presenter on any of the aspects that was contained in his presentation or indeed in the document itself, which I know you've all read, and if you haven't, as I said, you will tonight. But please, there are many aspects of that I'm sure people have some questions about. There are roving microphones again.
If you want to ask me about CEDA either, I'm happy to take whatever comes. We've only got a short time.
We're breaking the habit of a lifetime. Peter Martin, thank you.
Peter Martin, Fairfax Media. What things can CEDA do? You talked about being more active. Firstly, CEDA's taken a position, which is unusual. But what can you do to actually elicit change for these? I mean, I looked at, I think it was it 6 or 4 of the options on the smorgasbord? I thought they were all good. I couldn't choose between them. But given that there's been such little response and given that CEDA's deciding to become more active, what can you do?
Well, it's...
or what are you planning to do, about doing?
Yeah, well, we haven't landed is fair, which is partly, this is a sharing of a process today. Because, we're a member-based organisation. We don't have processes for having votes and doing all those things or adopting policies. So we have to be very careful about how we do this. But interestingly, we put out that document and we said, it'll be interesting to see if all the members rise up and say, this isn't what you're supposed to do, we don't want you to do this. And maybe some of you will now do that, but it hasn't happened. The broad feedback was, there was an expectation, this was a sensible extension of the CEDA brand to be able to actually say we as a body endorse a particular view on something as fundamental as this. What can we do about it? The subsequent rollout of that was that a whole lot of other people did join in that discussion, and we didn't, because we don't do that. So lots of editorials, and lots of economists, and CEDA actually, having put down the framework, got almost entirely forgotten. It's a very good question, and it's not wrong in the sense it's what we do. So we were consistent to what we do, but it did prompt the board to start to say, do we need to slightly rethink? I use the analogy, I can't use the actual company, but because I get into trouble, but on the companies that I sit, some of them basically require an HR and a PA, sort of a public relations function that is largely designed to release information. And that's largely what we do. The function that you need to actually be actively involved in a dialogue over a period of time and actually promote a view is different. You need different skills, you need different relationships, and we are beginning to start to say, are we right in the right spot for that spectrum? I haven't got any answers, but I'm as I say, any CEDA members who have a view strongly, by all means, talk to us, because we're thinking of doing a bit of research and a bit of solid work on this to try and see what we might do that might be different.
In other words, let me off the leash a little bit, I think, is the subtext. Any other questions?
No, him. Let him off the leash.
Please.
Thank you for the overview. I'm just wondering, Paul, we've heard 3 or 4 times over the last day and a half the income and wealth inequality and how that is a key socio-economic policy consideration to progress productivity and innovation in the country. How do you see that overlay playing in the budget constraints that you've called out? And should we be thinking about the more redistributive elements of what the budget does going forward?
Yes and no. The thing that I wanted to stress about the report was it was not addressing the longer term issues of tax reform and some of those issues about whether the 25% is still right. It really said we want to fast track a solution, and therefore we will take that as a given, that that's a long-term consensus view. There is a debate and a dialogue, and I think Nicholas talked a bit about it yesterday. There are some things we're just not talking about yet, and one of them clearly is, in the sort of society we've got going forward, is that still the right figure? Is that still the right cap? And I think that's a hugely important dialogue that has yet to happen. The concern that I tried to stress again today is that we are really worried that that really has to happen in the next few years, because with demographic change, you are absolutely seeing that this budget problem is not going to go away, it gets worse, and therefore we are going to have much more serious discussions about whether the cap needs to be moved or whether we can afford the sort of expenditure sort of lines that we're currently running. And that is something which is going to be very difficult if there's a $40 billion deficit that you have to solve, because there's always trade-offs in that. But having said that, what we did do is we said each of those packages we believed did take into account that issue of social distribution, and we felt that they were all largely skewed to groups in the community that were able to withstand those changes. The only area that we did identify that we accepted probably hit to the lower income was in the tobacco and alcohol. But that, of course, I mean, that's there largely because there's almost nothing left. You know, when you are trying to get any of those direct taxes, there's that, everything else is gone, and the politicians had ruled GST out, so we couldn't go there this time.
Okay, look, I might just, if I can, Chairman, pick up on a couple of the threads that came from the contributions by ministers and shadow ministers yesterday and marry it back to this particular report. And it goes, I think, to Peter's question about CEDA putting information out there and then how it's responded to. We would claim and take some credit for driving a number of the different policy discussions that are currently underway at the moment. Andrew Stevens, one of our directors, and of course who's responsible for advanced manufacturing advice to the government, remarked yesterday that everybody was talking about advanced manufacturing in the course of the last day or so. And we had done a report on that some nearly 2 years ago, saying that yes, the car industry was coming to an end. Yes, there was going to be economic changes associated with that, but you can't simply say that manufacturing was finished in Australia. It's not. It's a different form of manufacturing. It's high-end, it's value-added, it's high wage, it's low employment, it's highly skilled, it's globally connected sort of manufacturing now. And our report that we put out advocated that there were still ways in which governments could assist in that process and taking it forward. The future of work document that we talked about, and which was referred to over the last day or so as well, really has set the agenda for the sorts of discussions we've had here at this State of the Nation conference, but also, and again in terms of the budget deficit report and then the subsequent one that advocated solutions, we have events right around Australia on a regular basis. We do 300 events annually at CEDA where we put forward these views and we add value to those discussions by, again, talking about good public policy outcomes that can come because of the research work like this. And so it's not as if we don't try and connect with the broader membership base and more widely, of course, in the community. The other thing that I think in terms of some of those reports that we've done, some 2 years ago, we put a report out about the Federation, because you might remember at the time, the government of the day was talking about having a taxation white paper process where everything was on the table, and there was going to be a Federation white paper process. And what we argued is that the two would come together, because as we heard yesterday, there has to be some clearer delineation so that you get productivity enhancements by different tiers of government knowing what their responsibilities are, and you don't get creeping takeovers that come normally from the top to the state governments. And in fact, the Treasurers panel, I think, outlined a lot of that yesterday. So we advocated that there were some particular things that needed to be done, and we did that policy paper as a direct contribution to the whole process of the Federation White Paper. Well, sadly, it disappeared. The Federation White Paper disappeared, never came out, nothing happened. And the Taxation White Paper similarly disappeared, nothing happened. A lot of people spent a lot of money putting submissions to that about a genuine, grown-up, mature debate about what taxation reform was necessary in this country. I mean, I remember being here when I was sitting next to Ian Watt at a discussion that was at Parliament House around this, when I think it was Prime Minister Gillard was overseeing that, and where was it going to go? That's a long time ago. And then the subsequent government under Prime Minister Abbott said we had to do that. But again, everything, big table, everything's been swept off it. And that's where we come from, the position of this particular document, that some of what was advocated in it clearly was what was left over, because so much had been taken off the table that we couldn't really advocate or suggest things that were still viable and really should be discussed. So in terms of broadening our discussion around this, we'll continue the dialogue through events and so on in the coming 12 months and beyond. But what we'll be doing, of course, is trying to broaden that advocacy as well, to suggest that some of the forgotten issues around genuine tax reform that embraces everything that's necessary, we've got to have a bit of political leadership that's going to be tough, going to put it back on the agenda and take people on the journey to discuss it maturely, so that you get a bottom line that's going to be something that can be implementable, and at the same time enable governments to provide services that we all need. So I think what our chairman has said is this is a journey that's not over, and we will continue to be at the forefront of the discussions, looking at ways in which we can try and bring the solutions to good public policy outcomes to the attention of decision makers, and we've got a variety of ways in which we'll do that.
That's what.
Is that all right?
You call that putting him off the leash, you see. Yeah. No, I mean, CEDA, we don't normally have a discussion about CEDA, but I thought it was a good idea. Probably, maybe we should occasionally, because this group is different from the group that comes to the AGM. So we don't really get a chance to talk too much to you about what we're grappling with and what we're trying to do. I know there's a question up there that Stephen there's a question of waving his hand furiously up there.
Yes, thank you. Right.
Oh, good morning. David Harrison from the University of Western Australia, and also a State Advisory Council member in Western Australia. A comment and a question, if I may. The comment, in light of the public policy challenges that we've covered over the last day and a bit, and you've outlined this morning, may I encourage CEDA to continue its strong public policy work, but also dial up its advocacy, because the challenges, public policy challenges facing this country are significant, and I think we need organisations like CEDA taking an evidence-based stance and promoting good public policy. That's my comment. My question relates to the theme that we've covered over the last day, which is around innovation in business, and I'm be interested to hear what maybe innovative practices CEDA is either contemplating or prepared to look at in terms of engaging the public, politicians and other key decision makers to get them to latch on to that agenda we're talking about.
Yeah, well, I think that's partly what we're saying we're throwing into the ring at the moment. I've been, how long have I been chairing this?
Nearly 2 years.
2 years, and you come in and you're very careful about, this is a fantastic organisation, it's very well run, it's doing really, really well. It struggled some years ago and it has been rebuilt, and I'm really proud of the fact that, every state chapter is now humming, they've got good leadership, they've got good advisory boards and so on. So this is something, it's a bit special, there's nothing else like it in town or in the nation really with that spread. So we don't want to muck it up. We got a very good formula around getting high quality ideas out, and I think the process that Rod Maddock and his team goes through to try and work out what are the great issues that we want to look at in 12 months out, because you've got to do that in this cycle. I think the fact that we're landing so many of them are absolutely playing into the agendas going forward, I think is a sign of the fact there's a really good quality effort being put into picking them right. Because if we pick them wrong, they're useless. We produce them out and they die. But the fact that they're still talking about future of work, the Federation came up again, and we've got some really good things. There's a good one coming out on immigration shortly. So there's, we are really trying to keep that fresh and alive, and we've got some really bright people working on it. To what extent we want to play beyond that, obviously, Stephen could talk, but I won't let him because he'll use up all the rest of our time, about the fact that, we've hugely changed the way we communicate, the way we've embraced social media and so on. There's been, the CEDA doesn't look anything like the way it was a few years ago, and the team is absolutely on top of the changing role. So I think we're doing what we set out to do very well. I'm just nudging the question about whether we might do something a little different and a little more, but we can't do that unless the members come with us. So I appreciate your first comment. We don't have a structure to validate this. We can't have a meeting to vote on deficits, and if we get 100%, then we go. We're not structured like that. So we have to make sure that we don't get too far ahead of our membership. Sounds a bit conservative, I know, but I think in a member-based organisation, you need to hear that the board has that level of respect for making sure we don't do that.
My only comment to supplement that would be, of course, that even on our current website and on a brand new one that will be released early next year, there is an opportunity for people, members, non-members, to make comment on the work that we've done. We have blog capacity. We invite people to write on the CEDA website on issues of great moment. We certainly are current in what we embrace as well. And we encourage all of you, members, non-members, to become familiar with that, because again, that's a way in which we can get a message out and we can get different points of view in the same way as online forums like The Conversation operate. We are looking to develop that further as well, so that we can embrace more widely commentary around the research work that we do, the nature of the forums that we present, the high quality individuals that come along at CEDA forums, like the day and a half here at State of the Nation. And look, after that little editorial for CEDA, I think it's probably a good time to draw this session to a close, but in a very serious note, I think what we've sought to do here with this update on our deficit to balance report is to leave you in no other mind other than this budget deficit problem at the federal level is still there. There are measures that are being taken to try and address elements of it. But even $6 billion being taken out of a $40 billion in prospect budget deficit is a way to go. And so we will continue to monitor this, we will continue to do updates on it, and in fact there will be in our economic and political overview publication, which sets the tone for each year, and it will be out in February. There will be another update of this by one of the members of our commission that did a lot of the work that set the tone for it. So it is an issue that will be out there in the public domain. Please join me in thanking our National Chairman, Paul McClintock.
Thank you.